Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Okay, on to happier topics. We're gonna go through in the remaining portion of the show some research that I did, consumer survey about AI and search. And to my knowledge, it's really the first piece of research that really goes directly at the question of are you starting to how is AI impacting your search usage? There was a Tenuity survey that talked about this a little bit, but not to the same extent. This is not going to be the entire research. This is going to be a few slides that we can talk about. So I'm going to share my screen and then go through it. Okay, so everybody can see my screen, and so forgive us for.
I tried to mute, but didn't make it there in time.
Okay, forgive us for the visuals on this one. If you're listening but not watching, we'll try and describe what this is. So, really quick background. So, this is a survey of 1,000 U.S. consumers. It was done in November. It was done with an online panel. Two criteria had to be met to be included in the survey. You had to be a weekly search user or greater, meaning the frequency of search had to be weekly or greater. We bounced everybody that was less frequent. And you had to have used an AI application. We gave them a list of 11 or 12, including the familiar ones and some of the more obscure ones, at least once. You had to have used AI at some point in the past to be included. And we got rid of about 1,000 people who had not used AI. And from that, we extrapolated that about 44% of US adults have used AI at one point. That doesn't speak to frequency or anything else, but that was the number we came out with. So what this slide shows, and Mike, I'm looking at the screen, so you're going to have to just jump in with your comments. What this slide shows is that people, we asked, where are you looking for product or service information? Where are you doing discovery? Where do you get information that helps you make buying decisions? And people talk about search fragmenting. This was a kind of an interesting array of places that people are going. And it shows that search behavior is really not limited to Google, which is the way most of the industry thinks about it. And people think about Reddit or TikTok, but it's happening in a lot of different places. And this was
so just to give some context here.
Yep.
Read some of the percentages where people look.
So Google is number one, 72%. Then comes Amazon and YouTube tied at 57%. After that is Facebook. And then we get to basically TikTok and Instagram. Google Maps is after that. And then there's a bunch of others, which include...
yes, all of the voice assistants are in the low 20s, mid 20 range. So that's Siri, Alexa, and Google Assistant. I mean, just one comment about this is that Google has done a very good job of convincing people, even though they are only last attribution, they've convinced people that they are primary attribution.
Yep.
Right? And that's part of Google's gig, is convincing people that the reality is it has always been this sort of mess of mess. And often you end up making that final choice at, say, Google or someplace. But Siri, Alexa, and Google Assistant, for example, drive you through multiple sources. The question is going forward whether that last touch point, who's going to own it. And we can talk about that later.
Yeah, I mean, the attribution point is an excellent one. So let's move on. So everybody in the industry has been grousing about how Google's results, including me, especially me, have declined in quality, and the UI is too complicated.
You're a sample size of one.
Exactly. But no,
but an important sample.
The idea that Google search quality has declined over time is widespread. And so we ask consumers, is it easier or harder to find stuff on Google versus 3 years ago? And to my great surprise, what to my wondering eyes should appear is this result, which showed that 77% of these respondents, who are generally representative of the U.S. population, with those caveats about the screening questions, said that it was easier. And 49% said it was much easier to find stuff on Google than about 3 years ago, which just blew my mind. because
Well, we talked a little bit about this, right? I mean, and
right,
Rand Fishkin's recent research showing that the plurality of searches really do revolve around brand and are not discovery searches, I think
right,
could be a partial explanation for this, that people are looking for some specific thing and they go to Google to look for that specific thing. And in that sense, Google, they know how to do it. And they get the answer they're looking for because they're doing a brand search. I was telling you in the green room, I frequently will look up actors' heights because I'm curious about the way shots are portrayed. And IMDb does not have those kinds of things. So I'll go to Google and I'll type in the actor's name, and Google will bring up their age, their height, all that sort of stuff. And so I'm looking for a brand, basically an actor. So,
yep,
and those kinds of searches work very well on Google, and they're quick, they're
right.
easy.
That's right. And I think that's a strong theory,
For
and
some
partial.
percentage of them,
Yeah,
anyways.
for some percentage of that. That's right. We asked, so everybody in the survey had to be an AI user at some superficial level. And 57%, this is not what the screen shows, but 57% of these people were daily AI users, which was interesting. And some of them multiple times a day. A substantial minority were multiple times a day. This slide shows what's your go-to AI application. What do you use the most, or what's your preferred application? And ChatGPT, as you might expect, was number one with 37%. But interestingly, Gemini was not that far behind at 28%. And in a B2B context, we've done a bunch of surveys with agencies and small businesses, and ChatGPT is generally way ahead. The larger the business, the more likely they are to use Gemini. But with consumers, because Google is pushing Gemini at every single turn in Workspace and so on and so forth, it seems like it's working, and they're not that far behind, at least among this group.
Interesting anecdote in that regard. My daughter works at a firm that uses Google Workplace and has access to Gemini. She then got access to my paid version of ChatGPT and liked it better.
It's much better.
Started using it a lot. And the boss said, "Oh, well, if that's the one you're using and you're getting benefit from it, we'll get you a subscription to it." So she went
Yep.
and got a subscription to it, which I just thought was interesting because I've never
Yeah.
used Gemini that
Well,
much.
Gemini is like a weaker version of ChatGPT, except they just released Gemini 2.0 yesterday, and it has this sort of agentic quality where you can produce these reports, which are semi-impressive research reports, simply by generating a prompt. And so it's getting better, but it has historically lagged, just not as good as ChatGPT. We asked people, have you ever searched for a local business on AI, which is really a surrogate for ChatGPT in this context? And two-thirds said yes. We didn't ask them about quality of that search, were they satisfied with the result, but we just asked if they had done it, and two-thirds said yes. And what this to me indicates is people are sort of taking their search behavior and they're translating it over into AI, and they're doing some of the same kinds of things.
Although I had this yes, and it doesn't work that well because
Right.
a lack of
As the
geospatial
map as
as
the map discussion just revealed.
revealed. But I had this experience, which I told you about in the green room also, where I was inquiring at the highest level, what are the types of pellet stoves? I'm looking for supplemental heat source in case our electric goes out and warm a couple rooms that are not that warm. And so I determined the types, and I then asked, I'm interested in this type. What are some of the brands I might consider? And I went through this. And then ChatGPT asked me unprompted if I would like to see some local suppliers of these products, and then listed out wrong geography by about 50 miles, but it was still, it could be because of where my phone was connecting, who knows, but it was still, it prompted the local inquiry.
Right.
I did not initiate it as
and
part
there
of the
and there are some
conversation.
and there are some third parties like Near Street that provide inventory data, and you could imagine with this sort of follow up kind of search process that you did, this sort of conversational, faceted, or refinement process, that with that data they could do an excellent job of referring somebody to a place where you could buy it, and that would really collapse the whole funnel versus what it is today, I think. So we asked people, what do you like about AI? And we this is user interface, user experience kind of stuff, and basically things like direct answers versus links, conversational interaction, more comprehensive information, ability to ask follow-up questions, lack of ads, overall quality of answers. And these are sort of my biases reflected in the aided response. But people didn't have to choose them, and they liked a lot of stuff. The thing that they liked the most was the ability to ask follow-up questions, which is what your example illustrated, and the direct answers versus links. But they liked a lot of things, and they thought that the overall quality of answers was pretty good, and they liked the lack of ads. Interestingly, lack of ads was had the smallest positive response. That was the thing that was the least impressive to them, but it still had 35% said they liked it.
Yeah, it would be, I wrote this article last week that was behind the paywall, whether Apple Siri was going to supplant search functionality by bringing information into a different information retrieval context on the phone as a feature of the phone, as opposed to something separate from the phone. And I think that, if the phone, as we posited in the last section, stays the dominant physical way that you interact with the greater world, even if you have wearables, then the people that have that distribution, Android and Apple, are going to define what search looks like. Desktop may be more open, but desktop is much less than the phone. And really, and Apple is bringing information, very, very significant number of high level informational queries right to your phone that you don't have to go anywhere to get. It lays right over your conversation. So again, I'm in email and I'm watching TV and I look up something about an actor. It's right there without me having to go to IMDb and then subsequently to Google. And I think that who controls distribution to some extent is going to ultimately control the AI we see, how it integrates, how it becomes featureized as opposed to a separate task. And essentially Sherlocked becomes a feature rather than an application.
Well, that's what a lot of the AI, a lot of the antitrust stuff is about who controls distribution and trying to open that up. We asked people, did they trust AI content? And 61% said yes, 31% said sometimes, and only 9% said no or unsure. Now, there were some caveats. When prompted, they expressed some concerns about accuracy and privacy, but this was a pretty strong result. I mean, people could have said sometimes I trust it, or they could have expressed greater ambivalence, but almost 2/3 said that they did trust it.
Well, I mean, I would contend that there's the same issue with Google. Google has done a good job of convincing people they are trustworthy. I would contend, at least in many verticals, they're totally untrustworthy. In others, they're only moderately trustworthy. And I think that people have become somewhat acclimatized to truthiness in their search results. And I think that's what they're finding in the AI is truthiness, right? Not truth. And I think people are somehow more accepting of that kind of ambivalence in their life.
There's in a weird sort of way, depends on the category, but in a weird sort of way, there's more transparency with AI because you can evaluate. I mean, you might ask a question about something you have no idea about, like some medical condition or something, and then it's really problematic. But in a sort of a plain knowledge kind of context, you can kind of evaluate the veracity of the information because you can read it and you can look at the sources if you need to. I mean, which is something you can do with Google, but there's a way in which it's sort of it feels more accessible, than all the different sources that you don't know and then having to click back and forth. So, this is one of the more interesting findings, I think, among many interesting findings. We asked people, are AI and search similar or different, and do you use them in similar or different ways? And the largest response, 49% said they're similar and I use them in similar ways. 44% said they're different and I use them differently. A lot of people in the internet world, technology industry, sort of fall into the latter category. They're different. I use them differently, and they see the search and AI as two different kinds of animals. But the public at large, a lot of people see them as interchangeable, which I think is really interesting and potentially concerning for Google because it indicates, if I'm having a good experience, then I'll just go over to ChatGPT or some equivalent and do all my search stuff over there.
Yeah, again, I see series of, if Siri gets any good, all of this becomes secondary. And if ChatGPT is attached to Siri, then ChatGPT is going to get these questions.
Yep.
You know, and if Siri is no good, then these questions will remain. We'll know this in another 6 months or a year, whatever.
People will gravitate to whatever the easiest and best experience is,
Right.
and it's not going to be this intellectual choice about you know, I'm going to use AI versus search. It's going to be what's going to give me the best answer in the quickest way with the least.
And I think that's
friction.
going to evolve a great deal over the next 2 or 3 years, and it's going to make marketers' jobs harder because it's much more dispersed. We don't know the paths. It's like the messy middle is going to get even messier.
Getting messier and more and middler.
And middler. That's right. Messier and middler.
So this is a pretty dense slide, and for those folks that are listening but not watching, it shows we asked people what search or AI, what's going to provide the better experience and the better outcome across a bunch of content categories: finding a local business, travel planning, recipes, jobs, shopping, looking up websites, product research, financial planning, health, and legal. So
overall, the average runs 60-40. 60% say search is going to be preferable. 40% say AI is going to be preferable. And there's not a huge variation in that.
There's some categories that differ, but you're right. It's basically 60-40, or maybe I don't know what the averages are.
Maybe 65-35.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more than 60 in favor of Google.
Right.
But the other side of this, and I think the really important point, is that a pretty substantial minority, 30 to 40%, depending on the category, said that they thought AI was going to deliver a better experience and outcome, which is another illustration of the previous point that there's a group of people here who are ready to kind of jump ship. At least in their kind of thinking about the whole thing. Surveys and behavior are two different things. They don't always, what people say and what people do are two different things. See default search. I mean, people will do the lazy thing, but this is an indication that there is openness now, something that hasn't really existed in 2 decades, to using something other than Google. So this is the final slide, certainly not the entirety of the data, but for our purposes today. And we asked people, hey, do you think that AI is going to replace search in the next 3 years? And really what people are talking about, Google's got AI overviews. What we're really talking about is sort of the traditional search experience versus the conversational interface and experience that people are having on ChatGPT.
That's what people are talking about now. But I think back to my article that I wrote on is that I think people will, as you pointed out, behave differently when they are presented with different options, and it's very easy for them to do so. And when Siri and the new Android voice, fully manage AI correctly and bring these results to the fore without pain, without suffering. And again, it may take a number of years. I mean, if you look how long it took for Apple Pay to become pervasive.
Yes. Totally.
For 10 years, Apple Maps to become pervasive, 12 years, because they got up on such a bad footing.
Right.
But I believe that it isn't going to be AI versus search. It's going to be information retrieval. How are we doing it? I'm looking for some information. What's the easiest way to get it? And ultimately and the most reliable, and people will gravitate in that.
Right.
And it will peel away on the edges to start. It's not going to start at the core. I mean, Google has huge brand presence, huge loyalty. People very much in the behavior of doing it. And it's going to take a new metaphor, like something like Google Assistant or Apple Siri, to change that.
We're almost out of time, but on this final slide, will AI replace search? 67% said they believed it was likely or very likely. And the way that you should read this, and only 21% said were neutral, and only 12% said no. So there's a sense of inevitability here that something like the conversational experience that they're having on ChatGPT is going to define the next generation of search. Whether that is true or not, whether AI is not going to replace Google in 3 years, But whether or not this actually happens, the fact that people believe it's happening or going to happen is quite significant, and also reflective of this willingness, openness to do other things, to try other things, which did not really exist previously until, ChatGPT in 2 years has really made itself a credible alternative to Google, which is a remarkable thing, in this market.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with their integration with Apple, one perceives that likely to continue. Who knows? So,
all right, that's a lot of information. And
where will you be publishing these slides more?
You saw a lot of stuff. Most of this is client-only stuff. There's going to be an article coming out in Search Engine Journal next Tuesday, where I elaborate on this a little bit more. If people are interested in learning more about this particular research, they can contact me through Near Media or greg.sterling@gmail.com.
And are you going to write an analysis piece in Near Media?
I will.
Okay, good. Glad to hear that. But it'll be behind the paywall, and which brings us to this conversation that our podcast is staying in front of the paywall. People who subscribe to Near Media for the free version will get a summary and the reference links in their mailbox, and they can come watch it either on YouTube or on your favorite podcast channel.
And please consider subscribing. This is how we're continuing to do this work, which we really love to do, but need support to keep doing it. So we appreciate those people who have subscribed, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.